A couple of logistical things here again. For the latecomers that didn't hear, we had a little problem last year with someone with a license trying to smoke in the patio on the top floor here. There's no smoking at all there. We may not have another convention if someone tries to do that this year. So if you have a Health Canada card and need your medicine, please go outside where people can normally smoke, far from any doors or anything. Thank you for that. If you're sticking around after till 4 and want to help contribute, I have a small collection of prizes. I didn't put together that much. I got a Team 420 t-shirt, a couple little pipes and stuff. We have a raffle at the end of every convention. It's $2 a ticket, 3 tickets for $5. So if you want to help contribute and maybe win something at the end, that would be helpful. Other than that, and I guess as well, I should have said too, when you're asking questions from the floor, which is always fun to do, please speak up. We're recording this for YouTube and have it live on Stick'em. Some people, it's hard to hear if they're not speaking out loud enough. And, everyone wants to hear what's said today, so thank you for that. And yeah, just thanks again everybody for coming. I've got lots more announcements and stuff to make throughout the day. I guess I'll introduce our next speaker by actually bringing up decarboxylizing, which it's Herb, right? Yeah, Herb mentioned, you may not have heard of decarboxylizing before. Certainly I was selling a lot of cookies before I heard about it. But Dr. Paul Hornby taught our club how to decarboxylize. In fact, he's helped teach a lot of people around the world how to do that, and it's improved the quality of our medicine, and in doing so improve the quality of lives of the people that use our club and use this medicine. And we've included that in our product guide. I haven't mentioned, I just talked about Hempology. I guess I run a few things. I started Hempology in Victoria 16.5 years ago, and shortly after started meeting sick people that need medicine. And couldn't help myself. I started up the Cannabis Buyers Club. I had a van I lived in, got a pager and a pamphlet, started to help sick people. It's certainly grown from there. I have now probably 3,800 patients that come to the Cannabis Buyers Club in Victoria. It's, I think, the largest running dispensary in the world at this point. It's gone through a lot of trials and tribulations. Our recipe book, or our product guide, is online. You can learn about decarboxylizing, infusing. We have 31 food or skin products. We're actually going to be expanding that again in the near future. But we really like to teach people how to make the best possible medicine from this plant, and all the plant as well, like even the stalk. You know, when you're cutting your buds up and you get the little stalk at the end, save that, you can make medicine. When you vaporize, save it, there's good medicine left in it. You know, this plant is just full of beneficial cannabinoids and terpenes and such that we're just really on the tip of the iceberg. And Dr. Hornby is leading the way and is doing cutting edge research into cannabinoids, and we're so glad to be able to pull him out of his lab and teach us. We bring him out every chance we get. I teach a free lecture series at UBC as well. I've canceled this semester because of a court case I'll tell you about, but it is normally live on the internet. We put it up on YouTube as well. And Paul has come to teach our chemistry class for several years now. So if you want to get more information from Paul and see kind of his evolution of his work over the last few years, please check that out. But otherwise, you're here today and you'll get to hear from him. So please, Paul, come on up, and thank you again for all your work. Paul does have a quiet tone, like most scientists, as opposed to us activists who scream our heads off. So just try to be quiet, and if he needs to speak up, please try to wave your hand and get his attention.
I wonder if I can sit.
Oh, that would really hurt the volume, Paul. You need to project.
Okay. And normally I have a projector and a slideshow, which is in my briefcase right here, but I see there's no PowerPoint set up here, so I'm going to have to wing it, folks. And I apologize for that, because normally I have to look at a slide and then to follow my argument. And like Ted said, he dragged me out of the lab, and I'm not much of a speaker. I'm more of a listener and a lab rat. And it's kind of strange being up here in front of a room full of people. I normally sit one-on-one and in the lab alone. But thank you very much, Chris, for your introduction. A great history, and really with cannabis, how long it's been around and how important it is to the human being. And I have to dispel a few myths about myself right off at the beginning. A lot of people think that I'm about formulating fertilizers that grow big sticky buds. Not at all. I have been involved in fertilizers because it's to fund the research, which is my interest, which is to study the efficacy and safety of cannabis as a medicine. Safety, those two terms are really important to any regulatory body in the world that's allowing drugs to go on the market. Is it safe, and will it do what you say it can do? Will it have a desired effect, which is efficacy? I've used that term very loosely in earlier lectures, efficacy, because it's normally a term applied to clinical trials. And because there really are no clinical trials on natural product cannabis that have been done, there are a few, but mostly smoking experiments. But efficacy is, like I say, will it have the desired effect? You can take a cough medicine and it kills you, that's indeed an effect, but if you take the medicine, the cough goes away, then you have an efficacious medicine. In my mind, cannabis is the most profoundly efficacious herbal medicine that we have on the planet. It has an enormous spectrum of desired effects, from epilepsy to Crohn's to chronic pain to almost said psychosis, but to psychiatric illness, depression, many different effects. And as it turns out, what got me into this in the first place is that strain specificity. And the title of my talk today in the PowerPoint was strain specificity in cannabis. Years ago, I was working in an analytical lab in Burnaby, and a fellow called me up on the phone and asked if I could measure THC in hemp. And being an analyst by trade, that's what I do. I'll go back to that in a bit, but he asked if I could analyze THC, and I said, sure I can. What's the deal around this? And he said, well, you need a license to do it. So 2 years later, I had a license to analyze THC in hemp. It took that long to get through Health Canada's horseshit to get the license. And that was licensed to myself rather than the lab. So when I began my own company, a herbal quality control company, I took that license with me. And I started running contracts for industrial hemp. And the allowable limit on THC in hemp is 0.3%, which is 3 parts per million, which isn't a lot. And running these, when I first began running cannabis analytically, I used what's called a gas chromatograph, where you burn the sample, it runs through a column, they separate, then they go into a detector. Chromatography is a tool of my trade. I've been doing it for 30 years. Chromatography is often called separation science. I wish I had some pictures here to show you what I'm talking about, but in chromatography, you have compounds in a matrix, in a solution, and you put them onto, in my case, onto a column at very high pressure. And the compounds go through that column before they'll separate based on their chemistry. Because in the case of cannabinoids, they're highly fat soluble, and you're pushing them through with a solvent, so they'll stick to the column sometime, the other time they'll go straight through. But at the other end of the column is the detector. They can see the separated compounds as they exit the column. So First will come through cannabidiol, later will come through cannabinol, later than that will come through THC in the system that I use. And as they come out of the cone, they make a peak through the detector. My detector uses UV light. It's a glorified UV detector which measures the spectrum of UV light at each individual wavelength. So we're looking at 1 nanometer wavelength through the whole spectrum. So as, say, THC exits the column, it goes through the detector and the UV light shines through it, and it's in a 1 centimeter cube quartz flow cell with that light shining through, so it's all quantifiable. And it sends a signal to the computer, and the bigger the peak, the more concentrated the compound. Over the years, I've run more than 10,000 chromatographic samples of cannabis. It's all recorded on my instrument. Time and time again, I will see a huge THC acid peak, which when you burn it turns into THC, and a few other smaller cannabinoids like cannabinol and cannabidiol. What's ticked me off for years is that this huge THC acid peak, which has been bred into BC bud, because everybody wants, they think they want THC. So that huge THC acid peak, when you heat it up, it converts 1-to-1 into delta-9 THC. The THC acid doesn't bind the receptor. You have to activate it first, called decarboxylation, that Ted mentioned. He still calls it decarboxylize after all these years. It was decarboxylation. Anyway, you have to activate the THC by knocking off a little arm of CO2, which is an acid peak on the natural molecule. When you heat it up, that arm falls off and it can bind to the receptor. Decarboxylation is extremely important to understand if you're making baked goods, because say you make a brownie and you don't heat it at a long enough or high enough temperature, you'll only decarboxylate half of the THC. You'll have half that will bind the receptor and the other half that won't. Are you following me on this?
Yeah.
You've got to heat it up. You don't pick a bud off the plant, eat it. It's not going to give you a psychoactive effect. You got to heat it up. So in the analytical work that I do, I'm often running samples from compassion clubs where they'll send me a cookie or a brownie, and 80% of the time it's only half decarboxylated, meaning they're only getting half the efficiency from their THC potential that they could get, and also half the effect in the human body. Is BC bud good medicine? I call it psycho weed because of that high THC content. There's virtually no cannabidiol there. And I go on long rants about cannabidiol being the most medicinal of all the cannabinoids because it's a big, I call it a dumb molecule. It's like a big gentle molecule. It's a real electron eater. It's a wonderful antioxidant. It's anti-inflammatory. Some say it's the most powerful anti-inflammatory known to man. There's more research is being done. Really importantly, it's antipsychotic properties. It kicks the paranoia out of pot. If anyone's ever eaten an unstandardized brownie and gone through the pinhole, as we call it, meaning an overdose, you know what I mean. You can get your living bejesus scared out of you by too much THC. Add a little cannabidiol to that mix, that won't happen. Cannabidiol is very important to medical cannabis for those reasons. For 80% of the people using cannabis therapeutically are working with chronic pain. They're dealing with pain issues. if they're a lightweight, as we call them, and that would include most of the Middle Europeans. What do I mean by that? Let's go into a little bit of cannabis tolerance. For 5 years, I had my lab in a dispensary here in Vancouver, and over that time, I saw roughly 4,000 people using cannabis therapeutically. The people that were most tolerant to cannabis were the red-haired Highlanders, as I call them, the Scots, Irish, and Welsh, the British, and St. Celts. They could take 3 to 5 times more than a Middle European, someone from Poland, Germany, Croatia. Those are the lightweights. The Asians tend to be lightweights as well. The Africans are a mixed bag. They can be heavyweights, lightweights, you never know what to expect from the Africans. But the British Celts are the most tolerant to cannabis. This is in my observational science mind. I don't have any concrete data on this. It's just based on seeing the same thing happen time and time again. But for the lightweights of the world, who are dealing with chronic pain, they need a little cannabidiol there. Then they About 5 years ago now, Mark Henry, 4 or 5 years ago, Mark Henry sent a young lady to myself when I was working in the dispensary. She was suffering 10, 16 gram more epilepsy seizures a day at that time. She set records in children's hospitals. And her mom had taken her into the vapor lounge, and she smoked some cannabis, and Mom noticed a significant difference in her behavior. And Mark sent her up to myself, and knowing that I was into oral preps, and this is a very young girl, she was only 15 at the time. And I had been studying the literature on cannabis for a number of years and realizing that cannabidiol was often implicated in being anti-epileptic. But also I'm analyzing these strains and seeing time and time again this huge THC acid peak and virtually no CBD. A week after this girl was brought to me, a hippie kid comes from Vancouver Island with a sample for the club, and I run it while he's sitting there in front of me. I run it on my machine. And the first peak that comes out is cannabidiol, and it keeps going up and up and and I was telling the kid that this was really important for medicine, this molecule, and he starts to cry. He started to shed tears because he knew he was going to do some good. So within a day, I had this prep tucked into an oral prep and was giving it to this young lady in standardized capsules. And right away, her seizure frequency went way down, and she didn't seize for 2 weeks, nothing. And everybody was going, holy Christ, what's going on? Including her neurologist at Children's Hospital, who gave it a thumbs up, because nothing else was working for this kid. 2 weeks, no seizures, then she had a couple. After 3, 4 years now, she'll have 2 or 3 grand mal epileptic seizures a month, and she has a period. But a significant reduction in daily seizures from using oral cannabis with cannabidiol. Over the years, we actually seesawed her seizures by giving her preps with higher THC, where she could seize more, higher CBD, less seizures. Cannabidiol is extremely important for epileptic seizure control. It's now coming out in the literature that this is indeed the case. They're doing it with pure CBD preps. I am currently working with people. My lab is now on the island, by the way. I moved there a few months ago, working with people who are interested in cannabidiol. One fellow, a reductionist thinker, wants to purify it and put it in 2 kilogram bags up to the ceiling. I would do it because I don't believe it'll hurt anybody, but I don't believe that pure CBD, pure THC, pure cannabidiol, pure cannabidiol, any highly purified cannabinoid is going to have the effect that the mixture will have. I got reasons for that belief. I don't have the data here to show you, but firstly, I'm not a believer in synthetic drugs at all. I've been studying them a long time, and I just don't believe that a synthetic molecule belongs in a biological system. I believe they have a different energy around the molecule, even though the atoms are lined up in the same arrangement in space. The energy is wrong, and biological systems don't metabolize them and don't utilize them the way they use natural molecules. In the same way, highly purifying a molecule takes it into that kind of synthetic realm. Putting it into a biological system doesn't have the same effect. This has been shown many times, well, not many, but a number of times in cannabis research that THC by itself in a synthetic or a purified form will have a completely different effect than a cannabis extract on chronic pain or seizure control or whatever. The mixtures work better than the pure ones. So I'm a whole plant medicine guy. I've been that way for a long time. They made the mistake. I was educated in Western modern medicine. I must say that I hold a PhD in human pathology. I'm not a medical doctor. There's some of you that think I can write a script. I can't. But I've been trained in medical school classes, and I was trained in Western medical science, and then they sent me to India for a year for my doctorate training. And that was a big mistake, because in India, I ran into Ayurvedic medicine. I saw a lot of old people who weren't fat, who weren't on antidepressants and or heart medications. They were living on natural herbal products. And that changed my thinking, and I came back and ran into a number of herbalists here in Canada that were having tremendous effects with natural herbal products, and I've been that way ever since. And whole plant medicine, I believe, is the most efficacious, and cannabis being the most efficacious herbal medicine we have on the planet, it's time to start to utilize it. And as Chris brought up, or brought close to my mind, is what gives anybody the right to restrict a plant? You know, it's a gift from God. How can you restrict it? Put laws around it. That's always ticked me off. I turned my back on Health Canada many years ago. Well, they took away my license. We had a greenhouse with 2,000 plants in it. We were growing for the old club in Vancouver in the year 2000. Opened the door, and there's 10 RCMP officers outside with guns drawn, and they came and took all the plants to take our equipment. But we lost everything in a day, and very, very traumatic that was. But we had 7 strains from Holland growing in that greenhouse, and I was in heaven in those days, because right next door is my little laboratory. And they would bring me in samples. I could get in all stages of growth and see the THC evolving. And these strains were having, to put it real simple, 7 different effects at the Compassion Club. Strain A would work for chronic pain, strain B for seizure control, strain C for health. And people were going back to these strains time and time again. That blew me away when I first heard that. I didn't know that, and wow, because I've been running hemp for years, looking at the profiles. I wish I could show you these profiles I'm talking about, but the peaks that the individual molecules make. And knowing that each strain of cannabis had a different cannabinoid profile, and then I'm hearing that people are going for a different strain time and time again, then there's a profile will connect to the strain, and I can match a profile to a symptom relief. strain-specific system, really. So I've been doing that for many years, and one of the first things I did when I started out running it on a GC, as I mentioned. I had a brilliant lab chemist working with me in those first few years, and he said, run it on the HPLC, it'll look a lot different. Now I'm taking it away from a burning gas environment where you put the molecules through a column heated to a room temperature liquid environment where they're not heated at all. When you burn it, all you see is the THC, the decarboxylated form of cannabinoids. Running at room temperature, I see the acid form plus the decarboxylated, mostly the acid form. So I took a sample, ran it on the LC, saw the acid, then I took that rest of the sample, put it in the oven, heated it up for a while, brought it out, took another sample, ran it on the LC again, and that acid peak had gone down, the delta-9 THC peak had come up. So I ate it, and I got an effect. So I started thinking, well, that's all you have to do to eat it is to heat it up a bit, and then you grind it up and put it into a capsule. And having training in quality control for herbal medicines for many years, my first thought is I'll standardize and quality control cannabis into a capsule. So I've been doing that for about 10 years now. And I get interest from the scientific community because you got something that's quantifiable. You got each one of these capsules contains a known amount of THC and all the other cannabinoids that we can measure. We know how much is there, so we put them into a human body and see an effect, and somehow get a quantifiable approach to it. I shook these out in front of 9 oncologists at BC Cancer Research Center. About a year and a half ago. And one of the oncologists said, that's what we've been waiting for, standardized cannabis medicine. But could I talk them into doing a clinical trial? No. Not yet. We're getting closer, but I have written 2 case studies, peer-reviewed, published in scientific journals. The first one was on a fellow member of the audience here, John Fellow, who one of my first chronic pain guinea pigs. The second was on a woman with multiple sclerosis, and the third will be on the girl with epilepsy. In the midst of writing right now. But the medical community, these are case studies, one individual, one medicine, and one effect sort of thing. The medical community is waiting for what are called clinical trials, group studies, and where you run a placebo against your test compound, and you run it groups of 10, 20, 30. The more people, the merrier. The stats are better with more people. But we could do what are called pilot clinical trials with 20 to 40 people. We could do these in the clubs around town. We can do them in the hospital. We can do them anywhere we can group people who use cannabis together as people who don't use cannabis. But if people running clubs in this room, or anybody who has an interest to know where I can corral people, please come and talk to me after, because I believe that if we're ever going to get to the medical community, we have to do clinical trials, statistically relevant, provable effects, and when we do that, then we'll have some real data that we can take to the doctors that need. And incidentally, working with medics over the years, and I've met many, I find them all really curious. There's a few that are just hard-nosed and say, I don't have anything to do with it, but most are very curious about cannabis medicine. Most want to be educated, but they're not, and they never have been. And unless we educate them, they never will. And I guess a lot of them are, well, let's put it this way. What really turns my crank, and I've gone broke in this business over the years. I've spent all my money researching cannabis, my family's money, because there's no government grant money, and scientists work on grants. But the point I was going to make is that I can't even remember now. That researching cannabis, the medical community, they need concrete data, or they're not going to buy it. But I know what it was. In my work over there, there's been no money, but what I've had is a lot of pats on the back. Thank you for helping me. Thank you for changing my life. And thank you for really changing the quality of my life, if anything. And those accolades, our medical doctors could use too. I've asked a couple, have you ever been thanked for prescribing OxyContin? Never. Nobody ever thanks me for that. But I get thank yous all the time. I guess maybe it's a surprise that cannabis helps that much, or indeed its profound effect. It is the most useful herbal plant on the planet, and we've got it illegal. That makes sense.
We probably have time for about 2 questions or so, maybe.
Okay.
I've got about 6 or 7 questions. When you decarboxylate, when you observe the difference between the THC and the delta-9, did you observe differences between the CBDs and the CBNs as well?
Yes, sir. Absolutely. They all have carboxyl groups. They all decarboxylate. CBN decarboxylates first, THC second, CBD third. So if you're cooking up a prep with a good CBDA content, you want to heat it longer at a higher temperature to decarboxylate all your CBDA to CBD.
That runs into one of my other questions about time and temperature.
Yeah.
You didn't really describe.
I never do, because it depends on your starting material. It depends on how you're prepping it. If you're going to cook it in oil, you're going to have to heat it at a much higher for a longer temperature than if. Okay, let me just fix it for everybody here. When I do an oral prep, I always decarboxylate my cannabis dry before I put it into anything. I decarboxylate it first, then I'll extract it in an oven, in a container, in a sealed container. I don't leave it in a tray. You're blowing off all your THC. You got to seal it up, and your terpenes. I didn't even get into terpenes today.
Yeah.
Oh,
No, I'm just laughing. It's all good.
You want to lock it all in, okay? And you want to heat high enough and long enough to decarboxylate your cannabidiolic acid into CBD. Like I say, it's the last one to go over. At the threat of burning off a little bit of THC, sending it started.
How do I know?
You have to send it to old Dr. Paul to analyze. You can guess from the
Okay, with the Rick Simpson remedy, using naphtha, warming it up, keeping it less than 180 Fahrenheit during the distilling process, right? I created a container. If anybody wants to get some ideas of how to do the Rick Simpson, please talk to me. Anyway, I use a canner to create a containment vessel, so it captures almost all of the naphtha, right? But will that affect the decarboxylizing process that you're speaking of? Is that enough? And it's going to be warm. It's going to be at that temperature for probably about the first. It takes about an hour and a half, 2 hours to go through 3 gallons. About less than $1.80. Centigrade. Fahrenheit.
With all due respect to Rick Simpson, I don't believe there's anything special about his oil. I think it's just cannabis oil will have that effect.
Okay. So to improve it, can I take the reduced material and warm that up inside of a containment and have the desired effect? Like you're saying, put it in an oven, contain it, cook it for how long? will come down to something that you.
I would cook it first and then put that cooked into a sieve and pour your naphtha through it and collect your naphtha on the other side.
Okay.
And then dry that down.
Okay.
That's the way I do it.
How long for?
What?
How long for and at what temperature?
The naphtha?
No.
A generic 325 for 45 an hour.
Per pound? Doing it by the pound?
Yeah, do a pound at that temperature.
Okay.
But you want to, yeah.
Tiny pound.
See, we have to talk later.
Okay.
I have a 10-year-old daughter that suffers from migraine headaches and it's constant every day for like 2 months now. And I was wondering if you could suggest anything that could help.
Raw cannabis.
We're doing the Tylenol extra strength. She has to take 2 or 3 a day. She's only 10 years old and on her liver and stuff, right? And it's in the front of her head and it's constant. Western medicine can't help me.
Juice the raw leaf.
Or a patch on the back of the.
Google the power of raw cannabis.
Yeah,
Seriously.
I look
I
at
know.
migraines, even epilepsy, virtually all diseases being inflammatory. That's why ibuprofen do have some effect. It's an anti-inflammatory. Cannabidiol is a powerful anti-inflammatory. If you can find her a high cannabidiol strain, you might try vaporizing it or having her eat it, cook it up and eat it. And this fellow suggests juicing the raw plant.
Another suggestion I might add would be to use leaf instead of bud, because leaf has a lot of CBD and less THC, so you have less psychoactive effect, and the anti-inflammatory benefits in the leaf are quite dramatic as well. Most of our products are actually made out of leaf, not bud. But you wouldn't want to decarboxylize it because that would activate it more and potentially make it more psychoactive. At least, most of us would be concerned about, giving a child something psychoactive. So trying to take out that by not decarboxylizing it would be appropriate. It might be appropriate to even just straight juice it, but again, it's not decarboxylized in that state. And so that might be another avenue to go. It might be, if that isn't strong enough, you would want to try decarboxylizing just to activate it and make it more potent. But you would want to use very low doses as well if you did so. Your questions are tricky, and I'll try to get a couple people in as well.
Just for
You were talking about decarboxylation and just everything you've been running through your mass spectrometer throughout your entire history of research. Have you done any whole juicing plant runs through your mass spectrometer?
Firstly, I use an HPLC, not a mass spectrometer. Mass spectrometer is the highest instrument on my wish list.
Okay, sorry. Have you done
I'm not sure if I understand your question. Ran the whole plant through the instrument?
Yeah, you ran you juice a whole plant and then ran that.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Because there's 421 elements to the whole plant.
Yeah.
Your whole plant.
What I do is I'll take a bud sample, grind it up, weigh a known amount out, and then I put it into a solvent that'll suck all the cannabinoids into solution and leave most of the other crap behind. So I'm using methanol right now, but many times I've used tetrahydrofuran. THF is often called, but it's not expensive. But THF will go in, it has a ring, and will go in and suck those rings into solution. So I'm using solvents that are specific to cannabinoids, right? So they go after the cannabinoids, pull them into solution, and then I'm using a known volume of solution, so it's all calibrated.
Have you done it with the fresh plant itself, like the juice, the leaf, crushing and extracting the juice?
I gotta do everything.
And I'm honestly, I could interject, maybe he'll correct me. I don't know if there would be much of a difference between a juice of a cannabis plant and the plant itself, because the fiber would be removed, But essentially,
What's
we're
this
talking about the
concentrate?
same cannabinoid content and profiles and stuff. The percentage would be a little greater in the juice than it would be in the actual plant, because you're taking the fiber and vegetable matter out of it. But essentially, the actual test results wouldn't be much different from the juice as opposed to the plant that Paul normally tests.
Well, isn't that like all just cannabinoids? Well, there's like 420 other things in cannabis